Today we are going to look at the worst deaths caused by pranks. From a whose life got taken away after a roommate thought his allergies were a joke, to a trending social media prank that snapped a college student's neck. Let's dive straight in. It was May 24th, 2021. The desert heat in Tempe, Arizona had reached 96 degrees by late afternoon. Inside an off-campus apartment, fluorescent lights hummed over a small kitchen with laminate floors still warm from the day's heat. Dashiell Reese had just completed his daily ritual. At 20 years old, the computer science major stood 6 feet tall with the lean build of someone who never missed his 4-mile runs. Sweat still clung to his shirt as he entered the apartment, unaware that his roommates had spent the afternoon preparing what they believed would be harmless entertainment. The two business students had been planning their next social media video. Text messages recovered later would reveal their intention to test whether Dashiell was exaggerating about his peanut allergy. They had prepared a protein smoothie, secretly adding peanut powder. To them, it was just another prank for their followers. Dashiell approached the kitchen counter where his roommates had positioned their phone camera. When he asked about ingredients, citing his known peanut allergy, his roommates looked him directly in the eye and assured him it was completely safe. No peanuts, no allergens. They promised he could trust them. This was the moment that sealed his fate. Not the peanut powder itself, but the deliberate lie that convinced him to ignore his survival instincts. Believing their false assurances, Dashiell lifted the glass. The camera captured everything as he consumed approximately 4 ounces in 2 confident gulps. His roommates watched, expecting minor sniffling for comedic effect. They had no understanding of what they had just set in motion. The reaction began within minutes: oral tingling, throat irritation. His roommates initially laughed, still believing their prank was proceeding as planned. But Dashiell's body was already fighting a battle it could not win. Hives erupted across his neck. His breathing became labored, each wheeze audible on the recording. The realization struck all 3 of them simultaneously. This was not the minor reaction they had anticipated. Panic consumed the apartment. One roommate frantically searched for Dashiell's EpiPen, while the other dialed 911. When they found the auto-injector, it had expired 18 months earlier. They used it, but the degraded medication provided only limited effect against the rapidly progressing reaction. Emergency responders arrived to find a young man in severe respiratory distress. Paramedics first administered intramuscular epinephrine, the standard first-line treatment. But his airway was already rapidly closing. Only after his condition deteriorated further did they attempt to secure an advanced airway. They attempted to secure an advanced airway, eventually placing one despite the swelling, and began an epinephrine infusion during transport. But the damage was irreversible. At 6:02 p.m., less than 1 hour after trusting his roommate's promise of safety, Dashiell Reese was pronounced dead. The medical examiner's report was unambiguous: anaphylactic shock caused by peanut exposure. Laboratory analysis confirmed peanut protein in both the blender residue and Dashiell's stomach contents. The recording later became key evidence. Investigators used the footage and recovered messages to show the roommates knowingly introduced an allergen, despite his warnings. Prosecutors filed reckless homicide charges, citing their disregard for a known medical risk. Dashiell Reese ultimately died because he relied on assurances that were false. It was January 12th, 2022. Minneapolis had become a frozen wasteland where breath turned to ice and metal burned skin on contact. The city's underground parking garages offered refuge from the brutal cold. But sometimes, refuge becomes a tomb. Peter Shaw never saw it coming. The 35-year-old marketing analyst had built his life on routine and predictability. His co-workers found his reliability both admirable and boring, which made him the perfect target for what they thought would be harmless fun. He parked in the same space every day, arrived at the same time, and rarely deviated from his schedule. Outside of work, his habits were equally structured: weekly grocery runs, early morning workouts, and evenings spent maintaining his SUV, which he took pride in keeping spotless. The plan was simple: plant a jump scare in Peter's SUV, use his spare key fob to remote start the engine so the cabin would be warm, and record his reaction. They believed it would be harmless. The garage where Peter parked was an architectural relic. Concrete walls, low ceiling. The garage's aging, poorly ventilated layout allowed exhaust gases to accumulate far faster than modern standards would permit. When Peter's colleague pressed the remote start button from the street above, the SUV's engine started running in the enclosed lower level of the garage. Exhaust flowed from the tailpipe and began moving through the stagnant air of the garage. Peter walked into the garage and approached his SUV, finding it already warmed from the remote start. When he opened the door, the motion-triggered mask activated as intended, causing him to react with brief surprise. The prank had worked as his co-workers expected. But Peter didn't leave. He had gear to organize, equipment to check. With the engine running in the confined space, carbon monoxide began concentrating inside the SUV's cabin and the surrounding garage. As carbon monoxide levels rose, the SUV's interior air gradually shifted toward a dangerous concentration. The text he sent his co-workers was cheerful, acknowledging their successful prank. Those would be his last words to anyone. As carbon monoxide saturated his bloodstream, Peter's responses slowed and his movements became uncoordinated, consistent with the effects of progressing hypoxia. Remote start systems typically shut off after 15 minutes, but when Peter sat in the driver's seat and turned the key to accessory mode, the run timer was effectively extended. The engine continued its deadly work, while Peter slipped into unconsciousness. Security footage later showed Peter becoming disoriented and eventually losing consciousness as carbon monoxide levels rose. He never regained awareness. A resident reported a strong exhaust odor in the hallway, prompting maintenance to investigate. As they opened the garage access door, building carbon monoxide alarms activated, confirming the source. They found Peter slumped over in a vehicle that had become his coffin. The medical examiner determined that his blood contained 58% carbon monoxide, more than double the lethal threshold. The investigation was swift. Security cameras had recorded everything. Key fob logs provided timestamps. Carbon monoxide detectors offered scientific proof of the invisible killer. His co-workers faced the devastating realization that their harmless prank had become involuntary manslaughter. They had wanted to give Peter a moment of surprise. Instead, they had given him death. Investigators concluded the death resulted from prolonged carbon monoxide exposure after the prank unintentionally kept the engine running. His co-workers were later charged with involuntary manslaughter due to the foreseeable risk their actions created. It was late morning on July 22, 2021. Lake Tahoe's eastern shore sparkled under a cloudless Nevada sky, the crystal-clear water reflecting the sun. At 73 degrees with barely a whisper of wind, it was the kind of summer day that draws people to the mountains. The lake remained noticeably cooler than the air, typical for Tahoe, and the temperature drop reduced his breath-holding capacity once he submerged. Lachlan Cole had always been drawn to water. The 22-year-old freelance photographer possessed restless energy, always chasing the next adventure or perfect shot. Friends later told investigators he often volunteered for stunts without hesitation, a habit that shaped many of his projects. That morning, Lachlan arrived with his girlfriend Sarah and roommate Jake, both fellow creatives. Jake had brought his underwater action camera, eager to capture content for social media. The wooden dock stretched 30 feet into water that dropped to 15 feet deep, creating the perfect stage for their planned video. The idea seemed brilliant. Lachlan would stage a drowning prank while Jake filmed from below the surface, capturing the rescue from underwater. Sarah would play the panicked girlfriend on the dock before they revealed the joke. What none of them knew was that beneath the pristine surface, invisible dangers lurked. Old fishing lines and weights, discarded by careless anglers over the years, created a deadly web in the deeper waters near the dock. The performance began exactly as planned. Lachlan swam 25 feet from the dock and began his theatrical struggle. His acting was convincing, thrashing and calling for help while Sarah screamed from the platform. Jake positioned himself about 8 feet below the surface, with several more feet of deeper water still beneath him. After 30 seconds of fake distress, Lachlan took a deep breath and submerged as rehearsed. Jake filmed from below, expecting his friend to surface within 15 seconds with a triumphant grin. But something had gone terribly wrong. Instead of controlled descent, Lachlan's movements became erratic and desperate. His leg had become entangled in submerged fishing line attached to an old anchor weight, invisible until it was too late. What had started as a performance became genuine panic as the line cinched tightly around his ankle, preventing him from rising. Jake's underwater footage would later reveal the critical moment when entertainment became tragedy. Lachlan's attempts to surface grew increasingly frantic as the fishing line prevented his escape. His lungs, already strained from fake struggling, began demanding air his body couldn't reach. Jake, running low on air himself, was forced to surface to breathe, losing precious seconds while his friend fought for his life below. When he dove back down, Lachlan's movements had become weak and uncoordinated, the fight slowly leaving his body. Desperation drove Jake to dive repeatedly, finally grabbing a small utility knife from the dock to cut through the fishing line. But 2 minutes and 40 seconds underwater had already done irreversible damage to his friend's oxygen-starved brain. Sarah called 911 while Jake performed CPR, focusing on chest compressions as recommended for drowning victims. Paramedics arrived about 18 minutes later, a typical response time for that part of the lake, but their advanced life support couldn't undo what the lake had already taken. The coroner's determination was straightforward: death by drowning, with fishing line entanglement preventing the victim's ability to surface. Jake's underwater footage provided investigators with a complete sequence of events. Lachlan Cole had drowned not in a genuine accident, but in a staged scenario that turned fatal once the underwater entanglement prevented him from surfacing. It was March 8, 2022. The Texas night stretched across State Route 287, a long corridor of asphalt cutting through miles of open ranch land. At 52 degrees under a new moon, the landscape beyond the highway was pitch black, with only passing headlights breaking the darkness. Cora Hayes was driving home from another 12-hour shift at the county hospital's emergency department. The 26-year-old nurse was known for staying calm under pressure and for taking isolated back roads without hesitation. Her route home always included a brief stop at a small rest area where cell service returned. The rest area was one of the newer facilities along the highway, equipped with standard surveillance cameras and designated parking sections for cars and commercial trucks. Across the lot, Tyler Brooks, 28, and his friend Danny, 25, were preparing a prank they believed would startle Cora and end quickly with recognition and laughter. Their plan was simple. Danny would approach wearing a mask as a quick scare, while Tyler recorded from a distance. They expected her to realize who it was once she saw the truck and both men together. They positioned themselves behind a line of mesquite trees, assuming traffic in that stretch would remain sparse at that hour. When Cora pulled into the rest area and stepped out under the lone streetlight, she checked her phone as usual. Danny moved toward her as rehearsed, wearing the ski mask and approaching rapidly. But instead of freezing or hesitating, Cora reacted with the instincts of someone trained to avoid isolated threats. She immediately ran toward the highway, moving toward visibility and potential help rather than retreating toward the dark rest area. Danny continued after her, still believing she would recognize the prank once Tyler stepped out with the camera. Tyler remained 50 yards away, recording the unfolding scene while unaware that the reaction had escalated beyond anything they anticipated. Cora reached the edge of the highway just as an 18-wheeler approached, its headlights illuminating the road ahead at 70 miles per hour. The truck driver had less than 2 seconds from the moment she entered his headlight beam to register her presence. An 80,000-pound commercial truck traveling at that speed requires several hundred feet to stop. But the driver had far less than that. He engaged the air brakes immediately. Yet the distance was insufficient to avoid impact. The collision occurred at the outer edge of the right lane. The driver pulled his vehicle to a stop and called 911. Highway patrol and EMS units responded. They located Cora approximately 40 feet from the initial point of impact, consistent with a high-speed collision on an unlit highway. Tyler's still recording phone documented the events leading up to the impact. Investigators reviewed the footage, confirming that Cora believed she was fleeing an actual threat, not a prank. Danny's pursuit toward the highway was captured clearly establishing how the chase placed her directly into the path of oncoming traffic. The truck driver was quickly cleared of wrongdoing. Both Tyler and Danny were charged with involuntary manslaughter for initiating a staged scare in a location where escape routes led directly to an active highway. Their planning, footage, and positions at the scene provided investigators with a complete timeline of the incident. The coroner determined that Cora Hayes died instantly from blunt force trauma, the outcome of a prank that unintentionally placed her in the path of a moving truck. It was September 2nd, 2022. The humid Wisconsin night pressed against the residence hall at a university in Madison, the still air settling thickly in the upper floors. At 72 degrees with minimal circulation, the building's older HVAC system had shifted into its low-power night mode, reducing airflow through the narrow corridors. Tobin Wells, a 20-year-old computer science major, returned from the campus library with the quiet routine he followed every night. He was known for being focused, reserved, and predictable, rarely mentioning his long-standing asthma. Few knew that the inhaler in his desk drawer was nearly empty, something he had postponed replacing during a busy week. Down the hall, his suite mates, 3 business majors, had planned what they believed would be a harmless scare. They had grown bored with typical dorm pranks and decided to escalate the stunt by using a ski mask and a small keychain-sized canister of pepper spray to make the scares seem more dramatic. Their online searches had shown temporary irritation as the usual outcome, and none had considered how aerosolized capsaicin behaves in enclosed, poorly ventilated spaces. The building's design made conditions worse. Constructed in the 1970s, the dorm relied on sealed fire doors and long, narrow hallways that limited natural ventilation after hours. The low-power HVAC mode allowed airborne irritants to remain suspended much longer than the pranksters realized. As Tobin walked toward the suite, one of the students positioned himself in the doorway, wearing the ski mask, waiting to jump forward on cue. Another crouched beside him with the pepper spray, planning to discharge a short burst toward the floor for dramatic effect. When Tobin rounded the corner, the masked figure lunged forward. Startled, he dropped his notebook. The second student triggered a half-second burst of pepper spray, intending only to startle him. Instead, the aerosol dispersed rapidly, forming a lingering cloud that filled the stagnant corridor. Tobin began coughing almost immediately, his airways constricting in response to the airborne capsaicin. Within seconds, he was wheezing, bent over, and unable to draw a full breath. The suite mates, realizing the prank had escalated beyond anything they intended, moved him into the lounge and opened a window, but the limited airflow did little to clear the irritant. One student ran to retrieve Tobin's inhaler, only to discover the canister was nearly empty. The brief, partial dose it delivered offered no relief. His breathing deteriorated quickly, his chest rising and falling with visible effort as he tried to compensate for the narrowing of his airways. By the time 911 was called, Tobin was using all accessory muscles to breathe, his lips turning pale. Paramedics arrived and administered nebulized bronchodilators and oxygen, but the prolonged airway spasm had already driven him into respiratory failure, which progressed to cardiac arrest during transport. Resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful. The medical examiner determined that Tobin Wells died from status asthmaticus, precipitated by capsaicin exposure in a confined hallway with limited ventilation. Residue testing confirmed pepper spray particles along the corridor. The students involved were later charged with reckless endangerment, resulting in death. It was October 29th, 2021. The autumn rain pushed against the windows of a downtown Albany restaurant, the steady drizzle cooling the air to 51 degrees. Halloween weekend had arrived with gray skies and damp streets, making indoor gatherings far more appealing than anything outside. Genevieve Miller, a 24-year-old assistant manager, was finishing the last tasks of the night. Known for her organization and reliability, she often stayed late to complete inventory before the morning crew arrived. The restaurant's basement storage area, built decades earlier, held linens and cleaning supplies in a series of low-ceilinged rooms with limited airflow. A small restroom sat off the main hallway, equipped with an aging exhaust vent that moved very little air after hours. Upstairs, several members of the kitchen staff had prepared a Halloween-themed scare. One line cook had purchased several pounds of dry ice to create fog effects and decided to use the basement restroom for a prank. The plan involved placing a bucket of warm water and dry ice inside the small room, letting the fog roll out when Genevieve opened the door. They reviewed it briefly, believing the effect would be harmless. The restroom measured roughly 45 square feet, and with the exhaust fan barely functioning at night, airflow was minimal. As the dry ice sublimated, it produced visible white vapor mixed with heavier carbon dioxide gas, while the fog itself was only condensed water vapor. The CO2 accumulating beneath it displaced oxygen in the lower portion of the room. Over several minutes, concentrations increased to levels capable of causing dizziness and loss of consciousness in a confined space. As Genevieve finished her rounds and walked downstairs, one co-worker positioned himself in the hallway with his phone ready to record the reveal. The bucket in the restroom had been producing vapor for nearly 10 minutes. Fog pooled near the floor and seeped under the door. Genevieve opened the restroom door, clipboard in hand. To her, the effect looked like a harmless decorative setup. She stepped inside and bent down to move the bucket so she could access the shelving behind it. At that lower height, she entered the area with the highest CO2 concentration. Her first breaths contained significantly reduced oxygen. Within seconds, she became lightheaded. Her breathing quickened, and she lost consciousness shortly afterward, collapsing onto the floor. The co-worker filming hesitated at first, assuming she was reacting to the prank. When she remained motionless, he approached the doorway and immediately felt mild dizziness himself. Recognizing the risk, he propped the door fully open and dragged the bucket into the hallway to allow fresh air to enter. He then found Genevieve on the floor, unresponsive but still breathing. Emergency responders arrived to find elevated CO2 levels inside the restroom. Paramedics administered high-flow oxygen and ventilation support. Genevieve briefly regained a pulse, but the prolonged oxygen deprivation had caused severe hypoxic brain injury. She was transported to Albany Medical Center and placed on life support. Despite medical intervention, Genevieve Miller died hours later. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be hypoxic brain injury, resulting from carbon dioxide accumulation in a confined, poorly ventilated space. Investigators concluded that the dry ice placed in the restroom created a hazardous atmosphere that Genevieve unknowingly entered during her routine duties. It was June 9, 2022, at a small desert campground near the edge of the Mojave. Evening wind carried dust lightly between the sites as temperatures dropped. Families settled into their shelters for the night, while lanterns glowed through nylon walls, and the last conversations of the day drifted across the quiet loop. Jordan West, 7, and his sister Emily, 10, were camping with their parents for a weekend trip. Their tent sat near the center of the loop among several other family sites. Earlier in the day, a group of boys from a nearby campsite had been playing with novelty smoke firecrackers, setting them off on gravel paths where the smoke drifted harmlessly in the open air. As darkness set in, the boys lingered near their remaining firecrackers. According to other campers, they had discussed using the remaining firecrackers to bother children who were already inside their tents. They had placed unlit ones near other shelters earlier, creating momentary confusion without injury. Jordan and Emily's tent was partially zipped, and movement inside caught their attention. 2 lit firecrackers were slid beneath an outer panel near the ground. The boys appeared to expect only a brief puff of smoke. As the device slid under the flap, the burning fuse tip became pinned directly against the nylon, allowing the small flame to remain in contact long enough to ignite the synthetic fabric. Nylon camping tents can ignite quickly once exposed to sustained heat, and as the lower section burned, the structure began to collapse inward. Witness accounts varied. Some campers recalled hearing a sharp sound, while others noticed flickering light through the fabric, but assumed someone was using a lantern. Only when the flames intensified did people realize a tent was burning. By then, the lower half had already folded inward, filling the interior with dense smoke from melting synthetic fabric. The Wests ran toward the site after hearing shouting. At first, they could not tell which tent was involved, and several seconds passed before they recognized their own. Attempts to open the tent were slowed by heat, confusion, and limited visibility. People nearby tried pulling the collapsing material apart, but the structure continued to sag as the fire spread along the base. When the tent was finally opened enough to reach the interior, Jordan and Emily were pulled out. They were moved away from the flames while others tried to extinguish burning sections using water bottles and coolers. Emergency services were notified, though response time was slowed by the campground's remote location and difficulty accessing the loop. Both children were transported for medical care. Medical personnel later reported injuries consistent with smoke inhalation and exposure to a rapid tent fire, though the exact progression of events could not be determined. The timeline of when each child succumbed to the conditions remained unclear. The fire destroyed much of the physical evidence. Investigators found only charred tent material, partially burned objects, and the remains of several fireworks near the site. Because so much had been consumed, they could not identify the precise point of ignition. The boys involved were described as distressed and unable to give clear or consistent accounts, and questioning was limited due to their age and the presence of their parents. Investigators eventually determined only that fireworks had been used near the tent and ignited it, but many details about the exact sequence remained unknown. The incident was classified as a fatal accident resulting from a prank that unintentionally caused a rapidly spreading tent fire. It was April 19, 2019, in a small commercial strip outside Clarkston, Georgia. Overhead lamps cast uneven shadows across the pavement, and thin layers of pollen shifted along the lot each time a vehicle passed. The evening appeared routine until a series of avoidable decisions aligned within seconds. Jared Whitcomb, 22, arrived at the lot with his friends Lucas Marin and Chase Dorn. They regularly filmed short public reaction videos and improvised scenes, usually without structured planning. The group selected this area because the open rows of parking spaces and steady foot movement made it easier to record spontaneous responses. Their equipment included a handheld camera, lightweight masks, and 2 black imitation knives made of rigid polymer. The polymer knives were molded to resemble real blades, and in the dim center lot lighting, they were indistinguishable from actual knives. Environmental conditions contributed to what followed. The brightest lights were positioned near the storefronts, leaving the center of the lot in partial shadow. Reflections from windshields distorted outlines and made it difficult to distinguish fine details at a distance. Several witnesses later reported that they could see movement clearly, but could not identify the material or texture of objects being held. According to statements from Lucas and Chase, Jared walked ahead first, wearing a mask and carrying one of the imitation knives along his right leg. They stayed several yards behind him to capture the approach on camera. At the same time, a 56-year-old man named Ronald Beach finished loading groceries into his truck and stepped away from the driver's door. When he turned toward the lot, he saw Jared moving directly across an open pavement toward him. Witnesses placed the distance at less than 20 feet. Investigators reconstructed the next moments through security footage, physical evidence, and witness accounts. Jared took several quick steps toward the walkway, maintaining a straight line of movement toward Ronald. Ronald drew a legally owned handgun from his waistband and fired a single round. Jared collapsed immediately, striking the pavement near the painted boundary of a parking space. Lucas and Chase retreated toward their vehicle and did not approach him. Blood pattern analysis showed curved arcs at the point of collapse consistent with a forward fall. A shallow smear 2 feet from where he landed indicated only slight movement after impact. The imitation knife was found near his right hand, and the mask had shifted partially off his face during the fall. The camera had been dropped earlier and was later recovered about 15 feet behind the filming position. It continued recording, but captured only angled pavement and ambient sound. Local rescue teams arrived within minutes. They assessed Jared on the pavement and transported him to a medical facility, where he was pronounced dead shortly afterward. The official cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the chest. Forensic reviews showed residue patterns consistent with an intermediate range shot, which aligned with the distance witnesses described. Responders collected the imitation knife, the mask, and the recording device, which contained partial footage of the staging process. No functional weapons were recovered from Jared. Investigators concluded that Ronald reacted to what he believed was an imminent threat, influenced by lighting conditions and the appearance of the polymer blade. The final determination categorized the event as an accidental death resulting from misidentification during an unannounced stage scenario. It was September 3, 2021, in a remote climbing area known locally as Red Butte Pinnacle in northeastern Wyoming. Temperatures held at 52 degrees under low clouds, and steady southwest winds swept across the open meadow. The incoming system kept most climbers away, leaving the east side routes unusually quiet. Red Butte's primary ascent line followed a traditional crack system up a narrow volcanic pillar. The multi-pitch route required consistent technique, stable weather, and a leader capable of managing transitions across several ledges. Local instructors rated it suitable for intermediate climbers with reliable equipment and prior multi-pitch experience. Ethan Lau, 24, had driven to the site with 3 friends for a weekend climb. Ethan was the most technically experienced in the group, having completed several comparable multi-pitch routes in the region. His companions, Rob Ellis, Daniel Holt, and Chris Mendez, mostly climbed at indoor gyms and had limited practice outdoors. In preparation for the trip, Ethan spent several weeks reviewing anchor building, rope handling, and communication protocols with them. The group reached the trailhead at 2:45 p.m. Ethan laid out his gear in a methodical pattern, checking cams, ropes, helmets, and his personal harness, a well-maintained model he had used for the past year. The others organized their equipment beside him as the weather began to shift. Later that night, while Ethan slept, Rob and Daniel decided to play a prank. At approximately 11:40 p.m., they removed Ethan's harness from his gear pile and hid it in their vehicle, intending to reveal the joke during the morning pack-up. Based on later interviews, neither had considered the impact the missing harness might have on the climb's preparation window. The group woke before sunrise on September 4th. Ethan began his standard pre-climb check at 6:10 a.m., but could not find his harness after searching through every gear bag. After 20 minutes, Daniel offered his spare harness, a second-hand model he had purchased cheaply earlier that summer. Investigators later documented internal webbing and stitch degradation in the waist belt area, the kind that can weaken over years, yet remain difficult to detect during a routine visual check. Ethan adjusted the buckles to their tightest settings, but the fit remained slightly loose around his waist. With the weather moving in, the group began the approach at 6:50 a.m. At 7:25 a.m., Ethan started leading the first pitch. The initial section followed a clean crack, but transitioned into a leaning traverse, requiring him to sit back onto the harness while placing protection. According to witness statements, Ethan paused briefly at the traverse and appeared to test his position before fully weighing the harness. At roughly 80 feet above the ground, the waist belt webbing failed under load, causing the harness to open along the damaged section and releasing Ethan from the rope system. He fell backward away from the wall, dropping an estimated 70 feet before striking a lower ledge and then rolling onto the talus field. The group activated their satellite communicator at 7:32 a.m. Local search and rescue personnel reached the base at 8:20 a.m. and assessed Ethan, who showed no signs of life. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation confirmed that the spare harness had significant structural deterioration, especially along the waist belt stitching. Ethan's own harness, recovered from the vehicle, remained in serviceable condition. Interviews established that the missing harness had originated as a prank and that the group had no knowledge of the spare harness's compromised integrity. 2 members later faced charges related to reckless endangerment. Ethan Lau's death demonstrated how tampering with essential safety equipment can turn a routine climb into a fatal event when worn or unreliable gear replaces dependable protection. It was June 6th, 2021, in a 2-story home outside Fayetteville, North Carolina. Warm air drifted through the open back door as guests moved between the yard and the kitchen. Folding tables, balloons, and a tall layered cake on the island marked the early evening birthday gathering already underway. Gene Wilson, 18, had invited several classmates from his senior year social circle, including 17-year-old Kurt Lewis, who was known within the group for occasional light pranks at gatherings and school events. Jean often hosted small celebrations at his home because his family had space for outdoor activities, and his classmates were familiar with the layout of the kitchen and adjoining yard. The cake at the center of the island was a tall, multi-layered structure prepared by a local home baker for the occasion. Rigid, food-safe plastic dowels were positioned vertically inside the cake to stabilize the stacked tiers, though none of the guests appeared aware that internal supports were present. Shortly before sunset, the group closed in around the island to record the singing. Several guests crowded close behind Jean, limiting available movement and leaving little clearance between the island and surrounding bodies. He leaned toward the candles, while others raised their phones, narrowing the physical space further. Investigators later reconstructed the next sequence using video recordings, injury measurements, and material evidence from the cake. When the singing ended, Kurt placed a hand behind Jean's shoulder and gave him a quick, firm shove intended as a joke, aiming to push his face lightly into the cake. Jean was already leaning toward the candles, and guests were packed closely behind him, leaving little room to step back or brace. The impact compressed the tall, multi-tier cake downward and exposed the upper ends of two rigid, food-grade plastic dowels used to stabilize the layers. One dowel penetrated just below Jean's right eye, traveling downward at a slight angle. The combined effect of the focused forward momentum and the dowel's rigidity produced a deep puncture extending into the orbital region. The second dowel scraped across the cheek, producing a long, superficial tear. Cake fragments on the counter displayed a clear, narrow channel consistent with the primary puncture path. John attempted to pull backward reflexively, but the position of the dowel and the limited available space caused additional tissue damage as he fell sideways against the island. Blood patterns on the countertop and floor showed a rapid onset of external bleeding. Several guests stepped away, and one recording device captured the moment he collapsed after slipping against frosting and icing debris. A family member guided him to the floor and attempted to maintain pressure on the wound using folded towels. The puncture site displayed heavy external bleeding from damaged facial vessels, and John lost responsiveness within minutes. Local rescue teams arrived after a call from the backyard and initiated emergency measures. He was transported to a medical facility under assisted ventilation. Medical documentation confirmed a penetrating facial and orbital injury with associated vascular damage. Imaging showed the rod had entered the orbital cavity and caused significant vascular injury, leading to rapid blood loss. Despite intervention attempts, Jean was pronounced dead shortly after arrival due to acute blood loss and traumatic injury to the surrounding structures. Responders collected the plastic dowels, sections of cake, and photographs of the impact area. Measurements from the dowels matched the depth, angle, and spacing of Jean's injuries. Analysis of the cake layers confirmed that the dessert had been made by a local home baker using standard tier stabilizing dowels, which are commonly placed inside tall layered cakes to prevent structural collapse. The dowels were fully concealed beneath frosting and interior layers, leaving no outward indication of their presence to guests. Kurt provided a statement acknowledging that he initiated the shove without knowledge of the internal supports. Investigators concluded that the death resulted from an unintended interaction between the prank-induced forward force and the concealed stabilization dowels inside the cake. The incident was classified as accidental, caused by misjudged proximity, limited spatial clearance, and a lack of awareness of the cake's internal structure. It was November 8, 2019, in a remote section of Central Oregon, where a narrow two-lane road wound through forested hills. Evening temperatures hovered at 34 degrees, and patches of early frost formed across shaded asphalt as light winds moved through the trees. Rachel Martinez, 23, was driving home after finishing a late shift at a small local clinic. Co-workers later stated she typically drove cautiously on rural roads and followed the same route each evening. Device records showed she began her trip at 9:15 p.m., traveling through an area known for limited cell service and sharp curves. Investigators later documented that her friend, 25-year-old Tyler Ruiz, had left the clinic earlier that night. Interviews with acquaintances and phone data confirmed that Tyler had a pattern of making lighthearted prank calls involving fabricated emergencies. These calls were usually directed at close friends, and Rachel had been the target of several in prior months. At 9:28 p.m., Tyler called Rachel while she navigated a curved section of the roadway. The recovered in-vehicle audio captured Tyler's 9:28 call, in which he described a supposed fire at the clinic. and claimed that animals were trapped inside. He added details referencing specific rooms and noises consistent with rattled equipment. Investigators determined these details were fabricated based on interviews and facility records. Rachel's vehicle movements immediately after the call suggested an urgent attempt to turn around. GPS and skid analysis showed she decreased speed abruptly, pulled partially onto a dirt shoulder, and began maneuvering into a tight turning radius. Soil impressions indicated that the narrow, unreinforced shoulder, softened by recent rainfall, collapsed under the right side wheels, shifting the vehicle downhill. Tire marks showed she attempted to steer back toward the roadway, but frost on the pavement limited traction. The vehicle slid sideways, passed over a deteriorated edge of the shoulder, and descended a steep slope. Reconstruction specialists estimated an uncontrolled slide of roughly 80 feet through trees before the vehicle struck a large trunk at the base of the ravine. Rachel did not answer Tyler's later calls. Phone logs showed several redial attempts from Tyler beginning at 9:33 p.m., all of which went unanswered after the crash. At approximately 9:45 p.m., he drove along her route and saw displaced soil and bent railing consistent with a recent vehicle departure from the roadway. Emergency services were contacted at 9:47 p.m. Local responders arrived at 10:15 p.m. after navigating the narrow access road. Crews used lighting and rope systems to reach the crash site and found the vehicle heavily damaged on the driver's side. Rachel showed no signs of life, and medical personnel transported her to the nearest medical facility, where she was formally pronounced deceased. The medical examination determined that Rachel sustained fatal trauma to the head and torso, consistent with multiple high-force impacts during the descent. Analysis of the interior cabin, seatbelt marks, and deformation patterns supported these findings. The subsequent investigation concluded that Rachel's rapid attempt to reverse direction was triggered by the information provided during Tyler's call. Evidence supporting this included the recovered call recording, abrupt vehicle speed changes, and the turning maneuver executed at a location not typically used for safe turnaround. Interviews, digital evidence, and facility records confirmed no emergency had occurred at the clinic. Tyler was later charged with negligent homicide and reckless endangerment based on his role in prompting the hazardous maneuver. Rachel Martinez's death showed how an invented crisis delivered at the wrong moment on an unstable road can create conditions where even a cautious driver has no opportunity to recover. It was October 8, 2018, in a remote alpine region of the northern mountains. Temperatures hovered near 41 degrees under shifting clouds, and intermittent light rain created slippery conditions on the narrow, high-elevation trail that wound between steep drop-offs and loose rock. Sarah Kim, 26, had planned a short overnight trip to photograph autumn colors in the surrounding basins. Friends later told investigators she often completed solo hikes and typically carried standard backcountry equipment, including spray deterrent and food storage gear. Device logs confirmed she began her approach shortly after sunrise, moving steadily along the established route. 28-year-old Michael Reyes joined her for the trip. Interviews indicated he occasionally accompanied friends on mountain trails and had expressed concern about Sarah traveling alone during peak wildlife movement. GPS data showed both hikers followed the same primary route toward a common saddle with gradual elevation gain. Throughout the morning, Sarah stopped to photograph weather shifts and vegetation, as confirmed by images recovered from her camera. The photos documented wet rock surfaces, heavy cloud patches, and limited visibility across the adjacent slope. The pair continued along the ridge, where the trail narrowed to sections no wider than 18 inches. At approximately 1:20 p.m., while navigating one of the exposed stretches, Michael initiated what he later described as a moment meant to tease Sarah. According to his statements and audio captured from Sarah's recording device, he pointed toward a small stand of trees ahead and claimed he had seen a bear. He also pulled lightly on her arm as he made the remark. Investigators concluded that Sarah reacted by shifting her weight backward while turning toward the direction Michael indicated. At that specific point, the trail bordered a steep drop, estimated at roughly 200 feet, into a rocky drainage basin. Soil analysis and ground impressions showed that the edge consisted of loose gravel, saturated by earlier rainfall. Evidence indicated Sarah's backward step landed on unstable material. The gravel gave way immediately, causing her to lose balance. Disturbance patterns on the slope, including displaced vegetation and scrape marks along exposed rock, mapped her descent down the steep incline. The path of disruption extended approximately 180 feet before coming to rest among boulders and fallen timber in the drainage below. Michael activated his locator beacon at 1:23 p.m. Device logs recorded several short-lived attempts by him to move downslope, but rescuers later determined the terrain in that area was too unstable for safe descent without technical equipment. Michael remained on the trail and monitored the location until responders arrived. Mountain rescue personnel received the alert at 1:25 p.m. Due to distance and terrain complexity, teams reached Michael's position at 4:15 p.m. Technical specialists rappelled into the drainage and located Sarah at 4:45 p.m. She showed no signs of life and was transported to a staging area before being taken to the nearest medical facility, where she was formally pronounced deceased. The medical examination determined that Sarah died from traumatic brain injury and internal bleeding, consistent with multiple high-force impacts during the fall. Investigators found no evidence of recent wildlife activity in the area. Interview statements, device data, and physical terrain markings supported the conclusion that the false wildlife warning initiated the movement that placed her on unstable ground. Sarah Kim's death demonstrated how a fabricated alert delivered on a narrow mountain trail with compromised footing can create conditions where a single misstep results in an unrecoverable fall. It was January 15th, 2016, when 19-year-old Amelia Finch made a decision that would cost her everything. Working part-time at a local coffee shop while studying environmental science, Amelia was known for her adventurous spirit and eagerness to please her friends. That weekend, she joined her college buddies Mason and Rhea at a remote lakeside cabin in northern Minnesota for what was supposed to be a fun winter getaway. Mason, a 20-year-old barista with an impulsive streak, had been documenting increasingly risky winter dares for social media. Amelia had no idea she was being misled into believing the ice was safe when none of them had actually checked it. Rhea, 19 and working retail, was always ready with her camera, eager to capture the next viral moment. The trio had no idea that a midweek warm spell followed by an overnight refreeze had created dangerously deceptive ice conditions on the lake. The challenge seemed simple enough. Walk 25 yards onto the frozen lake to plant a flag while being filmed. Mason joked that the ice was tested and safe, but none of them had actually checked its thickness or brought any safety equipment. No throw ropes, no ice picks, nothing that could help in an emergency. As afternoon shadows grew longer, Amelia stepped confidently onto what appeared to be solid ice near the shoreline. Her winter boots crunched on the surface as Mason and Rhea recorded from the safety of the dock. The first 10 yards felt secure, but then she began hearing hollow sounds beneath her feet. Hairline cracks started appearing around her boots. At roughly 20 yards from shore, near a drainage inlet where the ice was thinnest, disaster struck. A small dark patch had formed near the inlet. Something ice safety experts later said was a telltale sign of weak spots caused by current flow. No one noticed it in time. The surface suddenly sagged beneath her weight, then gave way completely. Amelia plunged chest deep into the near-freezing water, her body immediately going into shock from the temperature. The icy water was a brutal 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Her heavy winter clothing became waterlogged within seconds, dragging her down. Every attempt to pull herself onto the ice edge only broke off more chunks, widening the hole. Her gloves couldn't grip the slippery surface, and panic set in as the cold began shutting down her motor functions. Mason and Rhea screamed from shore, but couldn't risk walking onto the unstable ice themselves. They threw a branch and an extension cord toward her, but both fell short of the expanding hole. Within 3 minutes, the frigid water had sapped Amelia's strength completely. Her coordination failed, her head began dipping below the surface repeatedly, and she aspirated the icy water. As her friends frantically called 911, Amelia's movements became weaker. The cold had overwhelmed her body's ability to function. She slipped beneath the surface one final time, leaving only bubbles and her knit hat floating in the dark water. Fire and dive teams arrived 45 minutes later, using specialized ice rescue equipment to recover her body from 12 feet of water. The average survival time in 34 degrees Fahrenheit water is less than 10 minutes without flotation or self-rescue gear. By the time rescuers reached the lake, her chances had already been lost to the cold. The medical examiner determined she had drowned due to cold water incapacitation, with the rapid temperature shock preventing any chance of self-rescue. The tragedy prompted the county to install warning signs about ice safety and launch public education campaigns about the dangers of early season ice. Mason and Rhea completed mandatory water safety courses, forever changed by witnessing their friends' final moments. What began as a harmless winter dare had ended in the loss of a promising young life, all because no one understood that ice safety requires more than just appearances. It was August 23, 2017, when 22-year-old Wilder Prescott's overconfidence would prove deadly on a downtown Portland rooftop. Working as a freelance graphic designer, Wilder had spent 3 years practicing parkour around the city's warehouse district. His athletic build and fearless attitude made him popular among urban explorers, but his need to push boundaries would become his downfall. The evening started when Wilder met his roommate and another friend on adjacent apartment building rooftops. His roommate, working in food service, had been challenging Wilder to dangerous stunts for their social media accounts. The third member worked retail and served as their camera operator, eager to capture viral moments. The gap between buildings appeared manageable at 8 feet across, well within Wilder's proven jumping ability. Wilder didn't realize he was being misled by his friend's confidence, believing the jump was far safer than it actually was, and what he didn't know was that their confidence was part of a running prank, an ongoing joke where they exaggerated the safety of stunts to push him into attempts he otherwise might refuse. He'd completed similar distances before, though never at such a dangerous height. 4 stories above concrete pavement left no room for error, but Wilder's competitive nature wouldn't let him back down. Earlier that evening, Wilder had consumed a couple of beers with dinner. While not enough to significantly impair judgment, the alcohol provided false confidence to override natural caution. Building engineers later confirmed the gravel layer was designed for drainage, not traction, a detail that made his run-up more hazardous than anyone realized. The rooftop's surface was covered in loose pea gravel, creating a treacherous footing none of them considered. As darkness settled, Wilder positioned himself for the jump. He measured out a 15-foot running start, believing the distance would provide adequate momentum to clear the gap safely. His friends positioned themselves on the target building, camera ready to document another successful stunt. The fatal sequence began when Wilder started his approach run. Building speed across the gravel surface, he focused on the parapet wall where he would launch into the void. But as he planted his takeoff foot, disaster struck when shifting loose stones beneath his boot caused instability. The unstable surface dropped his launch angle significantly lower than intended. Instead of the clean, horizontal trajectory needed, Wilder followed a steep downward arc that brought him well short of the target physics had taken control, with no correcting his path mid-flight. His fingertips barely grazed the opposite building's edge before his chest collided violently with the brick facade at the 3rd floor level. The impact shattered multiple ribs and caused severe internal injuries, but his nightmare was just beginning. The collision sent him rebounding backward into the narrow alley below. During his 40-foot fall, Wilder struck a fire escape railing with devastating force. The impact spun his body around, rotating him head down for the final descent phase. This rotation proved to be the determining factor in his fate. When Wilder struck the concrete alley surface, the head-first impact caused catastrophic skull and spine injuries. The force caused a basilar skull fracture and severe cervical spine dislocation, injuries that are instantly fatal upon impact. No human could survive such trauma. Witnesses immediately called emergency services, but paramedics could only confirm what was apparent. Officers documented the scene and initially classified it as a fatal fall during an unauthorized rooftop stunt. However, investigators later learned that the stunt had been encouraged through an ongoing prank between the friends, where they routinely exaggerated the safety of challenges to push Wilder into attempts he otherwise might refuse. Building management responded by installing higher barriers around rooftop access points. Wilder's roommate faced legal consequences, receiving community service and mandatory counseling for his role in the prank's escalation. The case became a sobering reminder that even seemingly harmless jokes can combine with height, misjudgment, and peer pressure to produce fatal outcomes. It was March 18, 2018, when 20-year-old Noah Sterling's trusting nature would lead her into a deadly trap inside a Chicago high-rise. Working nights as a security guard while saving for nursing school, Noah was known for her responsible demeanor and dedication to helping others. Her compassionate personality made her vulnerable to manipulation by those she considered friends. That night, Noah was off duty when her boyfriend and two friends convinced her to let them into the downtown office building where she worked. The boyfriend, employed at a warehouse, had a history of pushing boundaries for social media content. His friend worked in retail and carried a camera, while the third member held a restaurant position and instigated their reckless adventures. The group claimed they wanted to explore the supposedly haunted upper floors for a ghost hunting video. Noah reluctantly agreed, using her security access to bypass after-hours restrictions she had been drinking earlier, which clouded her judgment about the serious protocol breach. The freight elevator had been out of service for maintenance, with shaft doors secured but not locked. Warning signs marked the area as dangerous, but the group ignored these safety measures, pursuing dramatic footage. The elevator car sat parked at the basement level, leaving a deadly void above. What happened next revealed their cruel plan. One friend deliberately dropped a phone down the elevator shaft, then claimed it was accidental. They pressured Noah to climb down the maintenance ladder to retrieve it, playing on her responsibility as the building's security guard. Noah never realized she was being deliberately tricked into a situation they knew was unsafe. Noah opened the shaft door on the 8th floor and began descending into darkness. The maintenance ladder, uninspected for over 2 years, showed corrosion invisible in dim lighting. Her friends positioned themselves above with phone flashlights, supposedly helping, but actually filming her ordeal. Maintenance records later revealed the ladder hadn't been inspected since 2014, despite state safety codes requiring annual checks. At the 5th floor level, disaster struck when a corroded ladder rung gave way under her weight. The metal, weakened by years of moisture, snapped when she shifted her full body weight onto it. Noah lost her grip and fell backward into the black elevator shaft void. Her 60-foot fall was broken by multiple impacts, with cable guides and support beams protruding from shaft walls. Each collision caused severe spinal and internal trauma. She finally crashed onto the elevator car roof, parked at the basement level. The impact with the solid metal surface caused immediate cardiac arrest and massive internal bleeding. Her friends called emergency services, but specialized equipment needed to safely access the elevator shaft would take precious time. Emergency responders required 35 minutes to reach Noah, using high-angle rescue techniques. In high-rise rescues, confined space entry and fall victim recovery can exceed 30 minutes, even with specialized gear, a delay fatal for anyone with blunt force trauma. By the time they extracted her, any resuscitation chance had passed. The medical examiner confirmed instant death upon impact. Investigation revealed the building management's failure to properly maintain the ladder system, leading to significant citations. Her 3 friends faced serious criminal charges, with her boyfriend receiving the harshest sentence for orchestrating the deadly prank. The building implemented security upgrades, including locked elevator shaft access and continuous monitoring. New regulations required regular inspection of emergency ladder systems in commercial buildings citywide. Noah's family used her life insurance to establish a scholarship fund for aspiring nurses, ensuring her dream of helping others would continue through future healthcare workers. What began as a night of supposed fun ended with a young woman's death, proving that even those closest to us can harbor dangerous intentions when social media fame becomes more important than human life. It was July 12, 2015, when 18-year-old Hadley Rivers' desire to fit in would cost her everything at a suburban Phoenix pool party. Fresh out of high school and working part-time at a pet store, Hadley was known for her trusting nature and eagerness to make friends before starting college. Her mild asthma hadn't bothered her in years, so she didn't bring her inhaler to what seemed like an innocent gathering. The party was hosted by classmates she barely knew, but Hadley was desperate to break into the popular crowd. The host's older brother, a college student studying chemistry, convinced the group to film what he called a harmless pool prank. Claiming the water would change colors around swimmers, Hadley believed him, unaware the mixture he prepared was dangerously unstable. Working part-time at a grocery store, he boasted about his chemistry skills and assured everyone the effect would look spectacular on camera. What the group didn't realize was that their amateur chemist was mixing industrial cleaning agents with pool chlorine, creating a dangerous combination he had never tested. The chemicals sat in unmarked containers near the pool deck with minimal safety information. Hadley had been swimming in the shallow end when the fatal experiment began. The summer heat was intense with little wind to disperse gases. The pool's design created a natural basin where heavier-than-air chemicals could settle around the water's surface. The older brother poured granular calcium hypochlorite into the water near the steps where Hadley was relaxing. Within minutes, he poured in a common muriatic acid used for pool pH adjustment, unaware that mixing it directly with calcium hypochlorite releases chlorine gas almost instantly. The reaction was immediate and deadly, producing a yellow-green cloud of chlorine gas rising from the water. Because chlorine is heavier than air, it accumulated at the waterline, creating an invisible cloud no higher than a few feet, exactly where Hadley was breathing, and the toxic gas settled around the pool area where Hadley remained. She began coughing violently as chlorine gas attacked her respiratory system, her eyes turning red from chemical irritation. Her dormant asthma suddenly became life-threatening as her airways began constricting. Hadley attempted to exit via the steps, but the gas cloud lingered, forcing her to continue breathing toxic fumes. Her skin showed visible irritation while her breathing became increasingly labored. Other guests finally realized something was wrong when Hadley's speech became broken and desperate. The group moved Hadley to an open area and flushed her eyes, but her condition worsened rapidly as severe bronchospasm set in. Emergency technicians arrived within minutes, providing oxygen and bronchodilators, yet her breathing continued to deteriorate. Foamy sputum developed during transport, a sign of acute lung injury. At the hospital, imaging confirmed diffuse pulmonary edema from chlorine inhalation. Despite high-flow oxygen and mechanical ventilation, she progressed to acute respiratory distress syndrome with refractory hypoxemia. Hadley was pronounced dead in the early morning hours, her life cut short by a preventable chemical accident disguised as a harmless prank. Investigators classified the incident as a fatal chemical exposure during unauthorized experimentation, later confirming the color-changing pool prank had been carried out with no understanding of the risks. The homeowner received citations, and the brother was ordered to complete hazardous materials safety training. Hadley's family created safety programs in her memory, and the pool was permanently closed. It was September 14th, 2016, when 21-year-old Brooks Coleman's competitive nature would lead him to his death at a Denver construction site. Working as an apprentice electrician, Brooks was known for his fearless attitude and willingness to accept any dare. His construction experience had made him overconfident about workplace hazards, often bending safety rules when supervisors weren't around. That evening, Brooks met up with two co-workers who had been filming dangerous workplace stunts during off hours. Kyle, a 21-year-old laborer's helper with a reputation for pranks, had convinced Brooks to return to their job site after hours. Danny, a 20-year-old apprentice carpenter, reluctantly agreed to film their latest stunt. The high-rise commercial building had reached 12 stories, with upper floors lacking exterior walls and safety barriers. The skeletal steel framework created a deadly maze of open bays, with 8-inch wide I-beams spanning dangerous voids above the concrete foundation far below. Brooks had previously walked along similar beams at ground level, but never at such a lethal height without fall protection. The group had no harnesses, no lifelines, and no safety nets. Variable winds moved through the open structure, carrying debris that could affect the footing. Kyle's plan involved a cruel prank designed to capture Brooks' startled reaction. Brooks had no idea the stunt was a setup and that he was being tricked into walking the beam without knowing a scare was planned. As Brooks would step onto a 10th-floor beam, Kyle would sound an air horn from behind to shock him. None considered how a sudden loud noise might affect balance while walking 120 feet above concrete. Workers later said the prank was meant as a startle clip for social media, a trend circulating in construction meme circles at the time. As evening light faded, Brooks climbed to the designated floor and approached the steel beam. He tested his footing carefully, aware that dust could create slippery conditions. The camera was positioned to capture his planned crossing. Brooks mounted the beam and began shifting his weight forward, concentrating on maintaining balance. At that critical moment, Kyle discharged the air horn from directly behind him. The sudden blast caused Brooks to flinch involuntarily, his trailing foot slipping on the dusty surface. His center of mass shifted beyond the beam's edge as he attempted to recover balance. Brooks tried to step wide to regain stability, but the open bay offered no handholds. Gravity took control as he fell through the skeletal framework. During his 120-foot descent, Brooks struck a floor edge and scaffolding equipment, causing severe fractures and massive internal injuries. Each impact altered his trajectory and increased trauma during the fall. The final impact occurred when Brooks struck the concrete foundation slab. The force caused catastrophic head trauma and chest compression injuries. His pulse was absent when his friends reached him. Kyle and Danny frantically called emergency services, but faced delays accessing ground level because site gates were locked. With site gates padlocked for the night, the pair were forced to flag down a passing security patrol to unlock the perimeter, a delay that kept medics from reaching Brooks for nearly 10 minutes. Paramedics initiated resuscitative efforts, but Brooks had sustained injuries incompatible with life. The medical examiner confirmed death resulted from multiple blunt force trauma. The investigation revealed unauthorized site access and the absence of fall protection. The contractor immediately increased perimeter security and implemented zero-tolerance policies regarding pranks around elevated work areas. Kyle faced criminal charges, including trespass and reckless endangerment, for orchestrating the deadly prank. Donnie provided statements to investigators and later participated in safety outreach programs. Brooks' death sparked industry discussions about startle hazards at construction sites, transforming a senseless tragedy into a lesson that would protect future workers from similar fates. It was November 3rd, 2017, when 19-year-old Jennifer Paulson, passion for urban photography, would lead her into a deadly trap at an abandoned Detroit factory. Working part-time at a bookstore while studying photography, Jennifer was known for her artistic eye and love of documenting urban decay. She had always explored during daylight hours and never alone until this fateful night. Jennifer had joined an online urban exploration group that challenged members to spend entire nights in dangerous abandoned locations, filming the experience for social media. The peer pressure pushed her beyond her usual safety boundaries. That evening, Jennifer met up with Marco, a 21-year-old warehouse picker who ran a prank channel, and Tia, a 20-year-old art student easily influenced by group dynamics. They had chosen the abandoned factory specifically for its reputation as one of the city's most structurally unsound buildings. City inspection records later showed the structure had been red-tagged years earlier for severe roof leaks and termite damage, warnings long ignored by trespassers. The factory had been closed for 15 years, with floors severely weakened by water damage and missing floorboards. The third floor showed visible deterioration, with soft spots and warning signs noting structural instability. Marco had planned a jump scare to capture Jennifer's reaction, positioning a hidden sheet of metal nearby to drop while she photographed. Jennifer had no idea he was setting up a prank, or that he'd led her onto one of the most unstable areas of the floor. As midnight approached, Jennifer set up her tripod near a large window. Marco positioned himself with the metal sheet while Tia filmed from the doorway, ready to document what they expected would be harmless. Marco released the sheet metal, creating a thunderous crash. Jennifer startled violently and stepped backward onto water-damaged plywood, concealing rotted floor joists beneath. The panel fractured completely. Jennifer fell through to the second floor, but the impact caused another section of compromised flooring to give way, sending her plummeting to ground level in a cascade of splintered wood and debris. During her descent, Jennifer struck multiple splintered joists and metal debris, sustaining severe spinal fractures and internal injuries. A protruding piece of rebar caused a deep abdominal wound, adding to her trauma. She landed on broken concrete and rusted equipment. The impact caused significant bleeding and left her completely paralyzed below the waist, trapped in the cold, dark building with life-threatening injuries. Inside the steel-reinforced structure, cell signals barely registered. Emergency calls dropped repeatedly, forcing them to run outside before contact could be made. They applied pressure to her wounds using clothing and ran to find an exterior door to guide emergency responders. Emergency access was delayed by the building's size and debris blocking entry points. Responders eventually reached Jennifer using specialized equipment, but her vital signs had deteriorated rapidly due to blood loss and cold exposure. Jennifer was pronounced dead at the scene after unsuccessful resuscitation attempts. The medical examiner cited multiple blunt force injuries with hemorrhage and exposure as contributing factors. The property owner secured building entries and coordinated with officials to increase patrols around abandoned structures. Marco faced charges for trespass and reckless conduct tied to his staged prank. A campus exhibition of Jennifer's work included safety briefings for student photographers about structural hazards. When exploring abandoned locations, her death became a chilling reminder that urban exploration demands respect for decaying structures and that chasing social media content can exact the ultimate price. It was October 9, 2017, in Tempe, Arizona. Inside one rental home on South Mill Avenue, the phone's tiny recording indicator blinked faintly in the dark hallway. The larger LED panel beside it was switched off to keep the scene pitch black for the jump scare. He had rehearsed the jump twice, whispering into the lens with quiet anticipation. Daniel Mercer, 22, was a communications major in his senior year at ASU. He lived with 2 roommates and spent weekends editing short comedy clips for a YouTube channel he'd started in high school. His content leaned toward harmless slapstick, staged scares, fake arguments, and mild dares. The channel's growth had stalled, drawing pressure from peers who joked that his videos were stuck at 400 views. Friends described him as good-natured and persistent, always with a camera in hand. The prank series he had planned for October was meant to push his content slightly further. Halloween scare videos, as he called them. Their rental home was a narrow, one-story unit with thin drywall and laminate floors. Daniel's gear consisted of a tripod-mounted phone, a small LED panel, and a wireless mic clipped to his hoodie. His roommate, Alex Whitmore, 23, worked part-time at a car shop and often came home late. Alex had mentioned weeks earlier that he purchased a handgun after a nearby break-in. He usually kept it in his backpack during the day, but had since gotten into the habit of slipping it into a belt holster before unlocking the door at night. Daniel brushed it off, assuming the weapon stayed unloaded or stored away. That night, he texted another friend that he planned to scare the hell out of Alex for the next upload. The setup was simple. Daniel would wait in the hallway between the kitchen and bedrooms, hidden behind the half-open pantry door. The phone camera, facing the corridor, had a clear shot of where Alex would walk in. The recording started at 12:34 a.m., 8 minutes of silence, except for Daniel's quiet breathing. He adjusted the ski mask and crouched, phone mic barely picking up the creak of the door as he leaned forward. At 12:42 a.m., the front door opened. From the shadowed corner, Daniel lunged forward, shouting to scare Alex. The figure at the door fired almost instantly, mistaking him for a burglar. The camera on the tripod continued recording. In the corner of the frame, Daniel's body twitched once, then went still. Blood spread rapidly across the tile, pooling against the baseboard within half a minute. Moments later, Alex dropped his backpack, the impact echoing through the hallway. He stumbled forward, gun still in hand, his breathing sharp and uneven. Realizing who was on the floor, he froze, then fumbled for his phone. His voice cracked as he called emergency services, repeating Daniel's name again and again. At 12:43 a.m., the 911 operator logged a report of an accidental shooting during suspected break-in. When police arrived 7 minutes later, they found Daniel unresponsive with a single gunshot wound to the chest. The investigation concluded that the Glock 19 used in the shooting was legally owned and loaded with hollow point rounds. Gunshot residue tests confirmed a close-range discharge, consistent with roughly 1 to 3 feet, matching the estimated gap between Daniel's position in the hallway and the front doorway at the moment he lunged. No evidence suggested intent. Detectives determined the lighting and mask made immediate recognition impossible. The phone recording, intact, was retrieved as part of the case file. Authorities ruled the shooting accidental. No charges were filed after review by the county attorney's office, though the Mercer family sought civil action against Alex Whitmore for negligence. Friends described him as withdrawn afterward, avoiding calls and dropping out before the end of the semester. It was August 30th, 2015, on the Mendocino coast of Northern California. The parking lot at the Point Arena turnout was almost empty, save for a single silver sedan facing the water. Beyond the fence, the bluffs dropped steeply to a narrow stretch of jagged rock where waves struck in slow, rhythmic bursts. Lydia Harper, 25, was an elementary school teacher from Sacramento, known among her colleagues for her warmth and even temper. She'd started teaching second grade 2 years earlier and was about to begin the fall semester. She had been dating Evan Clark, 26, for 3 years. They shared a modest apartment near the freeway and occasionally filmed short couple challenges, mostly for their friends' amusement. The weekend trip to the coast had been Evan's idea, a brief escape before work resumed. Evan worked as a junior contractor for a construction firm in Elk Grove. The job had been wearing on him, and he joked about needing to do something fun for once. He had recently watched a viral video of a man pretending to propose as a prank, which went mildly viral among his peers. That weekend, he brought along a small ring box with a plastic ring inside and planned to film Lydia's shocked reaction using his phone. The spot near Point Arena, with its open view of the sea, seemed ideal. They arrived at the turnout just after 6 p.m. The fog was thickening, leaving a thin layer of condensation across the grass and gravel. The couple walked beyond the wooden fence to a flat area of exposed earth about 10 feet from the edge. Evan set his phone on record and propped it against his backpack, adjusting it until the frame showed both of them with the ocean behind. Lydia, unaware, stood watching the waves. The wind had begun to pick up slightly, dragging fine mist through the air. From the recording later recovered by investigators, the moment seemed casual. Laughter, the faint sound of surf, and the crackle of wind over the microphone. Evan dropped to one knee with exaggerated seriousness, holding out the small box. Lydia gasped, clutching her face with both hands, her laugh audible. She took a step back instinctively, shaking her head as if to scold him. The heel of her right shoe caught a patch of loose gravel near the edge. In the footage, her balance faltered. Her arms flailed, and a sudden sharp inhale cut through the audio. Evan lunged forward, shouting her name. The sound of his shoes scraping the ground could be heard, followed by a choked cry, filling the remaining seconds. The recording showed him leaning forward from about 3 feet behind her, stopping short of the cliff edge, shouting into the white void. He slipped once, catching himself on his knees, and then the video cut off as he reached for the phone. Investigators later determined he attempted to climb down the unstable slope, sliding roughly 15 feet before stopping due to the terrain and just calling for help instead. He suffered abrasions to his arms and legs and was treated for mild hypothermia that night. Search teams began work at dawn. Visibility was poor, but a Coast Guard helicopter eventually located Lydia Harper's body on a rocky ledge about 40 feet below the lookout. The coroner determined she had died instantly from blunt force trauma to the head and chest. The death was ruled accidental. Evan Clark was not charged, though he withdrew from social circles and resigned from his job within the year. The bluff was later fenced and posted with additional signage warning of unstable footing and no access beyond the barrier. It was October 29, 2018, in Portland, Oregon. A low-pressure system had settled over the Willamette Valley that evening. Inside the Walsh family's 2-story home in the Montevilla neighborhood, lights dimmed occasionally as thunder rolled overhead, but the power stayed on. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain and the muffled laughter of 2 siblings waiting out the storm. Jeremy Walsh was 17, a high school senior who liked to turn dull moments into jokes. He played varsity baseball, worked part-time at a grocery store, and planned to study graphic design after graduation. His sense of humor was impulsive, often leaning toward small pranks, nothing cruel, but sometimes poorly timed. Family described him as easygoing, restless, and constantly chasing reactions. His parents, both healthcare workers, were working late shifts that night. The Walsh family had adopted Rex, a 90-pound German shepherd, from a rescue group that spring. The dog had been described as protective, but trainable, with a history of agitation toward unfamiliar people and erratic behavior during loud noises. Jeremy's father had installed indoor cameras to monitor Rex's behavior while they were away. The cameras used infrared sensors and stored footage on a cloud server. On stormy nights, the dog tended to pace the hallways or bark at sudden sounds, something Jeremy found amusing rather than concerning. That evening, the rain intensified, lightning flickering through the living room windows and briefly illuminating the walls. Jeremy decided to play a Halloween-themed prank on his younger sister, Emily, who was 13. He found an old cracked plastic mask from a previous year's costume and a black hoodie from his baseball bag. Ignoring Rex's nervous pacing, Jeremy whispered to his sister from the hallway, then disappeared into the shadows, planning to jump out when she turned the corner. Emily hid under a blanket on the couch, phone light trembling in her hand. The dog's tension built gradually, triggered by the series of thunder that rolled through the house. The home security footage later reviewed by investigators showed Rex pacing, ears pinned, eyes fixed toward the hallway. When a louder clap shook the windows, his body stiffened, a typical fear response that often preceded defensive behavior in anxious dogs. Jeremy moved slowly toward the living room. When he reached the doorway, he crouched, mask glinting faintly in the dim light. The next instant, the camera recorded the rapid burst of movement, Rex lunging with full force. The sound of claws scraping on laminate flooring was followed by a heavy impact and Jeremy's startled cry. The first bite landed on Jeremy's left forearm, tearing through skin and muscle. He stumbled backward, falling onto the floor as the dog held on, shaking its head violently. The mask fell off and rolled toward the couch. Jeremy tried to push Rex away with his free hand, leaving deep scratches along his wrist. The room filled with the sound of barking, wet thuds, and the muffled sobbing of his sister. Blood splattered against the floor, visible in the grainy camera feed as dark streaks. The struggle lasted 47 seconds before Jeremy stopped moving. The dog released its grip, pacing in small circles, whining softly before retreating toward the kitchen. Emily fled the house barefoot into the rain, screaming for help. Paramedics reached the home 8 minutes after a 911 call from their neighbor. Jeremy was found near the living room entrance, with massive blood loss from a severed brachial artery. Attempts at resuscitation failed. His parents returned from the hospital that night to find the living room sealed with tape. Jeremy's death was ruled accidental. Animal control officers secured Rex without incident. The dog's prior behavioral notes confirmed 2 previous warnings for unprovoked aggression. The family requested euthanasia rather than relocation. His parents couldn't bring themselves to re-enter the house for weeks, staying instead with a relative. The Walshes later sold the house quietly the following spring and moved across town. It was July 3rd, 2016, in Austin, Texas. In a small suburban garage, a camera light blinked red. The space smelled faintly of motor oil and sweat, the walls lined with storage bins and old Halloween props. Tyler Brooks had been filming there for months, chasing a kind of low-budget fame that never seemed to arrive. Tyler, 20, was a communications major at Austin Community College and the self-described comedian of his small friend group. He ran a YouTube channel called Scarcely Known for crude humor, fake challenges, and edited skits mocking viral internet trends. Despite the lack of traction, he treated it seriously, convinced that persistence mattered more than views. He balanced part-time warehouse shifts with late-night editing sessions, cutting footage on an aging laptop while watching commentary channels he hoped to one day join. His humor often leaned into self-endangerment. Fake electrocutions, pepper spray dares, and one video where he pretended to pass out while live streaming. The setup that day was meant to mock internet hoaxes about viral self-harm challenges. The gag would involve Tyler pretending to hang himself mid-video, only to cut to him laughing seconds later. For safety, he'd borrowed a nylon climbing harness from a friend who used it for rock gym sessions, clipping it to a steel beam that ran across the ceiling. He tied a separate length of yellow nylon rope into a noose-style loop purely for appearance. The plan was to balance on a stool, kick it away for visual effect, then let the harness support his weight from a slack point just below the rope. It was a crude rig, improvised, untested, and meant only for a few seconds of filming. Tyler began recording around 2:13 p.m. The recovered footage, later analyzed by police, showed him positioning the camera at chest height, centering himself in the frame beneath the beam. He slipped the noose over his neck and adjusted the angle of the rope for dramatic effect. Sweat glistened on his forehead as he pulled at the harness clip, unaware it had rotated slightly against the beam, leaving only partial contact with the anchor point. His friends were due to arrive at 3. At 2:21 p.m., Tyler stepped onto the stool. He faced the camera, gave a mock salute, and kicked the stool aside. The sound of the metal clip failing came half a second later. A sharp, metallic snap, followed by a deep, choking thud. The harness carabiner had twisted free under tension, leaving the rope loop to cinch tight around his throat. His body jerked violently as his legs scraped against the concrete floor. The camera microphone picked up guttural choking noises and erratic movement. His arms flailed upward once, striking the tripod hard enough to jostle the frame. Then came only the scrape of shoes against the floor and a series of shallow, gurgling breaths. For 42 seconds, the motion continued. Desperate, disorganized, and slowing. Then everything went still. The frame stayed fixed on his body, swaying gently beneath the beam. The camera's clock kept counting silently as minutes passed. At 2:58 p.m., muffled voices came from outside. His friends returning from the store. The garage door opened, flooding the space with daylight, and their screams filled the audio. One of them rushed to cut him down, while another's voice, shaking, could be heard calling emergency services. Police arrived within 10 minutes. Emergency responders pronounced Tyler Brooks dead at the scene from ligature asphyxiation. Investigators examined the harness and determined that the clip had not been properly secured through both loops of the beam anchor. There were no signs of intent beyond the prank setup, confirmed by the footage and the script notes found on his laptop. The death was ruled accidental. His parents removed his channel within days, quietly deleting every video. They donated his camera and tripod to a local film school that year. It was February 15th, 2017, in Cincinnati, Ohio. The morning began quietly inside a mid-rise office building. On the 4th floor, a routine departmental meeting was in progress. It was an ordinary weekday discussion, without anyone expecting what would happen next. Mark Benton, 28, worked as a sales assistant. He had joined the company 3 years earlier after leaving community college. And though not the most focused employee, he was well-liked. His humor broke up the monotony of long workdays, office pranks, inside jokes, and harmless ribbing. He wasn't malicious, just impulsive, and often underestimated how seriously others took rules. The building itself was old, but well-maintained, equipped with manual pull alarms near each stairwell and a dated but functioning sprinkler system. That morning, the atmosphere in the office had been dull. Some staff were half joking about the long meeting schedule, and Mark, restless as usual, made an offhand comment about how easily the fire alarm could liven things up. Several co-workers laughed it off, assuming he was joking. But 10 minutes later, during a lull in conversation, he quietly stepped into the hallway, saying he was going to refill his coffee. The meeting continued as he lingered near the door. According to his later statement to police, the impulse hit him without much thought. He reached toward the alarm pull beside the stairwell, curious what would happen. The building's last fire alarm had been 6 years earlier, so most employees had never heard it in full volume. Mark looked over his shoulder, then pulled the lever. The alarm blared instantly, shrill, mechanical, deafening in the narrow corridor. Inside the conference room, startled employees leapt from their seats. Sandra Perez, the operations manager leading the meeting, shouted for everyone to evacuate, believing it was real. Witnesses later described the confusion: chairs toppling, coffee spilling, and papers scattering as the group surged toward the stairwell. Near the stairwell entrance stood Henry Lawson, 61, the building's janitor and a former Army mechanic. He had been waxing the floors just minutes before, his caution sign still standing nearby. The noise startled him. One witness recalled seeing him grab his chest and lean against the wall. As the crowd pressed past, someone's shoulder clipped him, throwing off his balance on the slick tile. Multiple witnesses said they saw him twist sideways before disappearing from view. He fell 2 flights, striking the steel handrail on the way down before hitting the concrete landing head first. The alarm continued blaring until Sandra reached the control panel and silenced it. When employees reached the bottom of the stairwell, Henry was motionless, blood pooling beneath his head. One staff member attempted CPR, while another called 911. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, but declared him dead at the scene from severe cranial trauma. Mark remained frozen near the hallway corner when police arrived. In his statement, he said he pulled the alarm as a joke to break the tension and didn't realize the repercussions. The following week, the company issued a statement calling the event a preventable tragedy resulting from reckless behavior. Authorities and local prosecutors reviewed witness accounts and concluded that Henry's death resulted from the false alarm and ensuing panic. Mark Benton was charged with negligent manslaughter and accepted a plea deal for 2 years in state custody. It was April 9, 2016, in Raleigh, North Carolina. A humid spring night hung over the North Carolina State University campus. Laughter and music drifted from one of the older fraternity houses. The air was heavy with beer, sweat, and a restless energy that always built before something went too far. Chris Tanner Wells was 20, a sophomore majoring in kinesiology with dreams of becoming a physical therapist. He was well-liked, athletic but mild-mannered, the kind of guy who volunteered for everything and rarely said no. Joining a fraternity was part of his effort to fit in, to find the same brotherhood his father had once spoken about from his college years. The fraternity had recently been placed on probation for noise violations, and its leadership wanted to keep traditions low-key. But the newer members, eager to impress, planned a series of harmless pranks that night. The idea came from a viral clip circulating online where someone was wrapped in a blanket and dragged across a gym floor. The fraternity's second-floor hallway had tile floors that reflected the yellow glow of ceiling lights, ending abruptly at a concrete stairwell landing. Tanner had brought his old blue sleeping bag for the overnight event. He didn't realize that while he was talking with another member, someone had already laid the sleeping bag out and tied a rope to it, planning to jump scare him by yanking it down the hallway once he got in. The rope they used was a frayed nylon cord used for towing lawn equipment. Red plastic cups and a half-empty cooler sat nearby, leftovers from earlier drinking games. Though no one was heavily intoxicated. At around 10:40 p.m., Tanner climbed into the sleeping bag, laughing as they zipped it shut around his shoulders, leaving only a small gap near his face for air. 2 pledges tied the rope to the end of the bag, double-looped for security, while the others gathered at the opposite end of the hall. The plan was to race from one end to the other and stop before the stairwell. Someone yelled a countdown, and the group took off running, dragging the bag behind them as Tanner's muffled voice could be heard screaming and laughing through the fabric. At first, everything went as expected. Sliding sounds, laughter, and the echo of sneakers on tile. But as the runners picked up speed, the hallway's waxed surface reduced friction more than they anticipated. One of the runners lost grip of the rope. The sleeping bag, still moving, slid freely toward the stairwell. The others lunged after it, their shoes slipping uselessly against the slick floor. The bag hit the concrete wall beside the stairwell with a sharp, heavy crack. The sound cut through the laughter instantly. When they unzipped the bag, Tanner was motionless, his head tilted unnaturally to the side. Attempts at CPR were panicked and uncoordinated, and they eventually called for help minutes after the impact. Campus police arrived within 8 minutes. Paramedics confirmed Tanner's death at the scene, citing a cervical fracture at the C2 vertebra, consistent with blunt force trauma to the neck. The medical examiner later determined the injury occurred instantly upon impact. The university expelled the group permanently, and 5 fraternity members were charged with reckless endangerment and furnishing alcohol to minors. Tanner Wells's parents requested privacy and declined interviews. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.